Am I stuck in some sort of horrifying Groundhog Day style time loop? Or is Danielle Hunter's contract just in the news again? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, I guess.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day, and a special shout out to those everydayers. Love y'all. You can find the show wherever you find fine quality audio podcasts. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire or even Roku. On those last two, just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. You can get all of the Minnesota sports shows, including Wolves and Wild, who are both currently in the playoffs, and the Twins, whose season is just getting going. Gophers, Locked On Minnesota Sports in general. Today's Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions, so thank you so much for submitting them. If you want to submit me a question, you can send it to me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can also fill out the Google form in the show notes or send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or even leave a YouTube comment. I'll see it there. First question of the day is pursuant to the news of the day. It comes from Josh Bunkers, who says, do you believe that Danielle Hunter will play in 2023 on a $4.9 million salary? Doesn't seem like it right now. So to catch anybody up who missed it, so Danielle Hunter's contract has been restructured to hell and back. So he has a salary cap hit, I think of like $15 million. I don't know it off the top of my head, but he has a base salary of $4.9 million. I think he has $5.5 million in terms of take home money this year, something like that. Which is really, really low for him, right? That's not a very good paycheck. Now, he did get $20 million take home last year, but people who are projecting an extension for him think he should probably be getting something like that every year. And I think that is where this is ultimately headed. Danielle Hunter is not showing up to voluntary workouts. Now, voluntary workouts, this isn't OTAs or minicamp. This isn't any sort of install or anything. This is just literally working out. It's just the team gets together and lifts weights and does cardio and does conditioning and all that stuff. And it is voluntary. It must be voluntary by the CBA. So there is absolutely no anything that the Vikings can do to even coerce attendance. Danielle Hunter can stay home because he wants to watch Love is Blind on Netflix if he wants. And that's absolutely fine. So there is not really a controversy to that. But it is what we are seeing across the league with players with uncertain contract stuff. Lamar Jackson's not showing up to voluntary workouts. Dalvin Cook, I don't believe, showed up to voluntary workouts. That kind of thing. I'd be surprised if Zadarius Smith showed up, although I didn't see anything one way or another on that. So that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with here. Here's what I think happens. A lot of people have talked about a Danielle Hunter trade in the draft. That is impossible. I guess it's not technically impossible, but it is extremely infeasible. Danielle Hunter's contract has been restructured through void years and stuff, such that if you traded him, so much dead cap would accelerate that his 2023 cap hit would go up. You could keep him on the roster and bench him and then let him go. And it might be more cap efficient than trading him before June 1st, which the draft is before June 1st, so you would have to. If you post June 1st did the trade of Danielle Hunter, you might be able to save a little and make it a little more efficient, but it's still like a deeply inefficient move. And you would probably need a lot back. You probably need first round picks back, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I don't think anybody would give that for Danielle Hunter with where things are right now. And then like they would have to negotiate him to an extension. Why don't we just negotiate the extension? But because there is really no feasible way to get this done before the draft, or to like cut him or trade him before the draft, I think this is the kind of thing that waits till after. And so May, June, July, that's when we talk about what's going to happen with Zadarius Smith, what's going to happen with Danielle Hunter. It seems like they are deferring those things until after the draft and that the front office's focus is on the draft. Now, Dalvin Cook's a different thing because he can be traded on draft day feasibly, and it would actually make some sense. And that might be something that is actually, I put on the tinfoil and thought that was kind of there might be one actually pre-negotiated that might just depend on how the board falls. But Danielle Hunter, Cannot be part of the draft. So you want to trade Danielle Hunter up to get to pick 3? I'm sorry, you can't do it. Time to find a different way. It's not possible. And that's not an opinion. That's like objective fact. It can't be done without the Vikings making more cap space to make room for dead cap. It's not happening. I'm sorry. But welcome to reality. So do I believe Danielle Hunter will play in 2023 on 4.9 million salary? Probably not. I think an extension is probably in the works for him. And then if an extension can't get done, then we explore trades, but we explore trades after June 1st so that it makes any sense on the cap. Purple Kool-Aid asks, is Joejuan Williams, or Juwan Williams, I think is how it's supposed to be said. He is a new cornerback for the Vikings. They signed a corner on Monday morning from the New England Patriots. I can have a little more information about him another time, but he's sort of a really freaky body type, really athletic guy, second-round pick in 2019. Didn't work out that well for the Patriots. He spent most of 2022 on injured reserve, and he ended up kind of hitting free agency, and so this is very much a buy the dip kind of move. And Purple Kool-Aid says, is he another buy low for high ceiling or just more of a CB4? And that's that. Definitely, I don't think projecting him to CB4, that's pretty optimistic, I think. I see him right now as a we'll see if he makes the team kind of guy because we don't know where his athleticism is at after spending a whole year out with injury. And also, it seemed like he was sort of falling out of favor in New England anyways. He got it seemed like in that training camp, he was on the verge of getting passed up by some of those Patriots cornerbacks, the Joneses. I think they called it Jonestown over there, which is very funny. So we'll see if he makes the team. That's going to be where, but I'm putting him in kind of the roster bubble category. Maybe he makes it. Maybe he doesn't. It'll probably come down to how good he is on special teams. Stefan Larson asks, Ben DiNucci, Viking, or have you noticed any certain players in the XFL do you think the Vikings should try signing? So I think the Vikings have their backup quarterback in Nick Mullins. They probably feel pretty good about that. I do think Ben DiNucci has earned himself a chance to make a team. I think what he's done with the Sea Dragons is very cool. And I think he has earned a chance to go try to make an NFL team. I don't know if he will, but he should get to a camp. Hey, look, you need some camp arms too. They only have 2 quarterbacks under contract, so they need to bring in some case cookies, if you will. Speaking of quarterbacks, Skull Network says, other XFL guys. There is a corner for the Brahmas who's also on the San Diego Fleet in the AAF. I've loved this dude for years as like a spring league guy. Cameron Kelly is always a really intriguing guy to me. I don't know. He's just plays sticky. He's just got a lot of dog to him. Would love to bring him into camp, right? Let's see what he's got. See if he can't make the team. Skull Network asks, how are the Vikings not trading for Trey Lance? He's literally Kwesi's wet dream, high pick, high upside, injury history, little production in the NFL. Okay, I think people are super underestimating how high the 49ers are on Trey Lance. He got injured. Their backup came in. The backup played well. They let Jimmy Garoppolo go. I think they're ready for Trey Lance now, for better or worse. I don't think that they were that high on him last year because they kept Jimmy Garoppolo in the building, which was an odd move to me. They have now let Jimmy Garoppolo go. Also, Brock Purdy probably won't be ready for camp. He might not even play at all in 2023. So I don't think that there's as much competition as I previously thought for Trey Lance. I think he's just the starting quarterback for the 49ers, and I think they're going to go for that. So that's probably why. I don't think the 49ers are looking to get rid of Trey Lance. I know that every 10 seconds there's this weird speculation about Kirk Cousins becoming a San Francisco 49er. Please stop that. Please. We're exhausted. Come up with a new talking point. Clickbait outlets. Travis Schellinger, asks, with Cousins being the polar opposite of that description, is Trey Lance the anti-Kirk? A couple people were talking about Trey Lance in my replies and asked some questions there. Kinda, yeah. Well, so Kirk Cousins can run okay, but Trey Lance, like running, is kind of part of the offense you put in for him, right? You run QB power with him. You do Lamar Jackson stuff with him. Trey Lance's, if I remember, his accuracy was like spotty, and Cousins' accuracy is very consistent. That's supposed to be the kind of the thing about him. I don't think that he's the anti-Kirk because I don't know how much of I'm struggling to remember, and I did not have a great detailed Trey Lance take coming out. So I'd have to go back and remember what I thought before. But he's not like a Joe Burrow improv kind of quarterback. He's more of a Justin Fields kind of improv kind of quarterback, right? Or like Bryce Young is a pocket dancer. He's like to go to this draft. Bryce Young is a stay in the pocket, keep your eyes down, improv around a lot, but he's closer to that Joe Burrow style versus like Anthony Richardson, where I am my own check down. And I felt like Trey Lance was more the latter, but I can't remember that great. But if so, Bryce Young is the anti-Cousins. He's the let's make something happen no matter what kind of guy, although he's pretty accurate too. I think that's maybe why he's probably going to go 1 overall, it seems like right now, which you can bet on at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. As of this recording, Bryce Young is a minus 1,500 to be the #1 overall pick. So that feels like the cat's out of the bag there. Go Panthers, I guess. Then you have CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson as the next QB off, and people kind of don't really know now. Maybe Will Anderson goes #2. Personally, I think that's a smokescreen, and you can bet against it, or you can bet on NBA games, MLB games, NHL games. 2 of those 3 leagues are in their playoffs, and the Twins are also doing pretty good. So if you want to bet on any of that stuff, again, you can go to FanDuel. And hey, if you're new, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can claim a no sweat first bet. That means if you whiff, you can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets, even if your first bet doesn't go so great. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get the FanDuel app, which is safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can parlay a whole bunch of different outcomes together, try to get a better payout. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the MLB. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. I'm going to start telling people now, hey, I'm going to be live on draft night. If you would like to enjoy the draft with me, I won't be broadcasting the draft. I can't do that because of copyright. But we can just kind of hang out in a big old live stream chat room and talk about stuff as it happens. So if you're interested in that, come pop in. I'll probably do better than ESPN and try to leverage players' personal traumas less. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag episode, Ruben Frost says, if the Vikings were to double dip at a position, would you rather corner or wide receiver? In this draft, corner by a mile. I think the corner class is just better than the wide receiver class. I would much rather have 2 of these corners than 2 of these receivers on average. In general, that's pretty even without considering the actual class. Like if you're just thinking generally in all else equal, would you rather have 2 corners or 2 receivers? I mean, I don't know. Corners cover receivers and receivers go against corners. So to me, that apparatus being good on both sides of the ball is kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other to me. But in this particular class, I would much rather double dip on corner. I like the depth at corner a lot more, and I like the starters at corner a lot more. Skull Actuary says, what's the difference in contract value between 131 and round 2 pick 1? Does that 5th-year option outweigh the decrease in salary? Does talking about a QB only pick change that stance? So my understanding is that the 5th-year option has sort of become less valuable over time as contracts have sort of adjusted to it, because the 5th-year option is a fully guaranteed deal. It's like a franchise tag, but instead of being the top 5 contracts and then averaging that out and that's how much the deal is, it's the next 5 contracts, contract 6 through contract 10, average that out. That's the 5th-year option for that position. And at certain positions, that's just not a good deal. At center, that's not a good deal because the salary cap sees all O-line contracts as one big position. So you'd be paying your center top 10 tackle money functionally. I mean, you don't want to do that even if the center is good, which is what happened with Garrett Bradbury. They didn't pick up the 5th-year option, and instead they signed him to a second contract after he hit free agency that was way cheaper than that. But even if Bradbury was a better center, I still think he would have been cheaper than that 5th-year option. But for quarterback, that's still a really good deal. For something like receiver or corner, that's still a really good deal. But in other positions, like on defensive tackle, that might not be as good. Or linebacker, that might not be as good because the cap might see some linebackers as, Von Miller and Joey Bosa or whatever as like quote unquote, or Khalil Mack as quote unquote linebackers, but not. You don't want to have your Brian Asamoah making Khalil Mack money, right? That isn't the same positional value. So it definitely depends on the position is my answer to this. And I think the difference between those picks The fifth-year option still does give you that flexibility, and it still definitely is, of all of the drop-offs in the draft, I think it's like the second biggest drop-off, and the first biggest is pick 1 to pick 2 in terms of like draft value. But there's also a lot of differing opinions on this in the analytics community. Nate from Houston asks, 22 has ended, and KJ Osborne does not seem to be the ideal number 2 wide receiver. And he went on to back up why he thinks that, but I'm going to skip that. What would you say about his style of player? Overall ability has limited his ascension to number 2, or was he the number 2 wide receiver and it was just disappointing? He was not the number 2 wide receiver. Adam Thielen was. But once TJ Hawkinson came in, he was the number 2 receiving option, and then Thielen was kind of 3 and KJ was 4. But what I will say right now, I don't know if we know as surely as we think we do that KJ Osborne is not the actual number 2 receiver. The way the Vikings are talking about it, and we'll see how they behave on draft night here. But it seems like KJ Osborne might have a freer, clearer path to wide receiver 2 than we may be thinking. And look, dude was clutch as heck last year, and I do think that he has gone a little bit underrated over the last few months, where people have just kind of forgotten what he did in that Colts game and some of the clutch plays that he had, like the Panthers game in 2021, where he caught the overtime touchdown, a lot of third downs, a lot of really cool plays, that kind of big resurgence. I think he's just like a solid contributing receiver. I think in a modern NFL offense, you need 2 KJ Osbornes and a Justin Jefferson to really be a complete group. So they definitely do need one. But they might just kind of rely on JJ and KJ and then go with tight ends and extra CJ Ham reps and more kind of personnel stuff to wrap it all out and fill out that stuff. Well, I guess I'll just move on. Hawkfan asks, have you completely given up on Jalen Reagor? Any chance he could develop with Cousins and get it together? Kinda. He was not good. But look, getting traded at the end of camp, that makes things hard, right? And some of his problems were communication issues. They were going the wrong way on option routes. They were not finishing routes the way he was supposed to and stuff. So some of that stuff was mental, and theoretically that will, year 2, you get more comfortable in the system and that kind of stuff should fall away. But combine that with his time in Philadelphia, and I just am not sure he's like that good of a dude. The team, the way they talk about these guys, seems way more excited about Jalen Nailor, which is why I've kind of talked about him as the guy who's, if I were to bet on who is wide receiver 3 before the draft, and maybe other people enter the room, but if I were to bet right now on who's most likely to be the third wideout, it's Nailor overcoming Jalen Reagor. But make no mistake, they will compete for that in camp. So Reagor has every opportunity to prove me wrong there. Travis asks, what happened to Keyshawn Butte? Booty? Keyshawn Butte? I don't know. Is his name actually Booty? I don't actually know. I heard he was a consensus first round pick before the season, but now he's a day 3 pick. I believe the answer to that is that he bombed his testing. Yeah, he ran a 4.5 flat, really bad jumps, really bad agility scores. He just isn't. That's going to hurt a guy pretty bad. That was supposed to be a first round pick when you have that sort of athletic profile. I've got a few more questions here that I want to make sure that I get to. So let's keep on trucking. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Joshua Brook asks, what defensive tackles not named Brian Bresee, Kalijah Cansey or Jalen Carter do you like the look of? So there's a couple. I'm not that deep into the DTs. I haven't really looked at them. Maybe I should cram them really hard for this last week here, because I'm pretty much as done with wide receiver and corner as I'm going to be. I'm not going deep into the day 3 guys or whatever, but the DTs, I know Mozzie Smith is like a historic athletic tester, and people really like him. People really like the Wisconsin dude, Keanu Benton, that I took in the mock draft yesterday. So you can listen to that. The Wisconsin guy, some kind of faster guys. I like both of those guys, though. They are over 300, but they have like quickness to their game, which is pretty fun. Those are a couple. It seems like that sort of 40s to 70s sort of band of DT talent is actually pretty thick, and maybe the Vikings dip in there. Josiah Jenkins asks, would you rather see the Vikings trade up or down if you had to pick one, and who would you like to target in that scenario? So my hierarchy here goes, the thing I want the most is to trade up for a quarterback that I like, right? I don't want to trade up for Will Levis. I've explained that in a previous show. It's a whole show about Will Levis, so I'll direct you to that for why, but I don't want them to trade up for Will Levis. I don't agree with that move. I would like them to trade up for Anthony Richardson Or goodness, if they got CJ Stroud, I'd be doing backflips. That's my favorite outcome of the whole draft is Vikings trade up and draft CJ Stroud. Holy crap, if that happens, we're building a Kwesi statue immediately. He's insanely good. He's my number one. If I were the Panthers, I would take CJ Stroud. That's my number one overall pick. So if that guy ends up being a Viking, that's incredible. Probably pie in the sky, but that's my favorite thing. If it's not for a quarterback, I think trading up is like a genuinely bad move. Even if it's for somebody like Devin Witherspoon, who's my CB1, or Joey Porter, who's my cornerback 2. There's so many other corners that I just don't think it's worth it to jump up the board to get cornerback 2 when cornerback 6 is still like really good. It's just not worth the extra capital. That's where I feel about trading up. But so it's like trade up for a quarterback and then trade down would be awesome. I would love to trade down out of the first, honestly, because you could probably get a lot for that. You might even be able to get an extra first round pick next year, a second round pick next year, and like a fifth this year or something like that. And that becomes, if there are no quarterbacks and you're not trading up for when you didn't get the quarterback you want, now you're set up to get the quarterback next year by infusing yourself with a little extra capital. You know how everybody talks about, man, they traded for TJ Hawkinson. Now they don't have the capital they need to move up for that quarterback they need. If that turns out to be the case, then you can leverage this position and stock up and now have an extra second round pick next year. And it's the opposite of that situation. Now they're very set up. And now it's just a matter of deciding who you want and figuring out where you think they're going to go on the board. So I would love that in terms of who to target. It's hard to predict who falls all the way out of the first, but usually there's, with like 7 or 8 first round worthy cornerbacks, depending on your opinions of guys like Clark Phillips and Keely Ringo, the 7 or 8 cornerbacks are not going in the first round. That's too many teams to take a cornerback. Somebody is going to be there. And I think you could trade down into the 40s and still get a guy that probably is worthy of a first round selection. And you're just not paying first round premium on him. Great stuff. Simon Cap asks, which of the top wideout prospects would play slot versus outside? Smith and Jigba and Addison are both better slot options, in my opinion. I don't agree with that. I think both those guys can play outside. Just because they're small doesn't mean they're a slot. And I've talked about this a lot on the show. Small does not equal slot anymore. Slot corners are big safeties sometimes. And, people will spin down their big 6'4" Jaron Curse and play slot. You do not want a 5'9" shifty receiver against that dude. You're gonna get boxed out, right? It's the slot is a place to find mismatches, and so you want mismatch people in the slot. And in terms of outside, that's not like the big physical. There are 5'10" outside corners everywhere. It's just we just don't have to stereotype this anymore. So I think that those guys can do slot. For me, the biggest thing about slot is blocking, which is a big reason I don't want Jordan Addison in the slot, and also why I don't think the Vikings will be very high on him. As they won't be as high as I am on him, at least. So that's going to be what this comes down to. I think Smith and Jigba can play anywhere. I don't love Josh Downs in general, but I don't really see a distinction outside versus slot for him. But I want blockers. You want a really fun slot? Jonathan Mingo. There's a really fun slot. He can block like crazy. And I think the additional room will do him well in terms of releases. And that's a bargain bin kind of guy. He's somebody that some people have him falling all the way to like the 4th or 5th. I would take him in the 2nd. I'm really high on him. Trill Swaggets asks, negotiating through social media has risen to prominence, i.e. Hunter deleting Instagram posts. Given how social media evolves, what do you think it is the next step in players expressing frustration with teams? Y'all read into that stuff way too much. Look, I have seen 100 media cycles of Danielle Hunter liking a tweet. Here's the rule. If a player likes a tweet that gasses him up, do not read into the fact that it is from a fan of a different team. Or that it's like, I remember a couple years ago, there was like a Titans fan that was like, ooh, I would love to have Danielle Hunter on the Titans. And he liked that tweet because it gassed him up. There was never any talk of Danielle Hunter to the Titans. We never found out, even after the fact, of any Titans trade negotiation happening. That was not a report. And people took it like to the bank. Please learn your lesson if you made that mistake. But yeah, all that being said, Stephon Diggs kind of made that happen, right? With that tweet, but that feels much more like an outlier scenario. When he tweeted time for a new beginning, and that got the Bills going in, and it can kind of get trade talks going. I still think negotiating through the mainstream media is still a much bigger tool. telling Tom Pelissero, look how healthy Dalvin Cook's shoulder is. That kind of stuff is going to do a lot more than Dalvin Cook saying, look how healthy my shoulder is, or liking tweets or deleting tweets or Instagram posts or whatever. I have never really read into that stuff, and I'm going to tell you right now, I have not missed much. You're not going to find me behind on these stories very often, and I refuse to read into players' social media. And honestly, like, players should just be able to post what they want and express themselves without it becoming headline freaking news on NFL Network every time. Leave these dudes alone for 10 seconds and go touch grass. That's not, aggression is not at you, Trill Swaggets. Maybe it is, because you shouldn't change your name. You shouldn't change it back. Stu asks, a lot of talk of drafting a QB this year to have them sit behind Kirk and develop for the year. Is there any kind of proven track record that QBs are better with a year as backup developing as opposed to being thrown as a starter? So this will always have noise in it. This is really hard. I think, yes, I think there is absolutely a tangible value to the Jalen Hurts path where he didn't really start until the end of his rookie year, or Aaron Rodgers, of course, is like the big example. Patrick Mahomes is a big example. Lamar Jackson's a big example. Versus the Josh Allen path, where you just throw them in as a rookie and just kind of accept that they're going to be bad and hope that they develop. I do think that there's more examples of Patrick Mahomes than there are Josh Allen's, but it will always be noisy because we don't know what would have happened to Josh Allen if he waited a year. What would have happened to Patrick Mahomes if he went in his rookie year? That we just don't have that like control scenario. So it's always going to be comparing two different quarterbacks with two different scenarios and pretending that they control for each other, and they just don't. So yeah, it's always going to be a little speculative. It's always going to be a debate just by its nature until we can somehow have two identical quarterbacks and actually control for the variable of, was this dude good to begin with? But I will say, from a volume perspective, yeah, there are definitely a lot of quarterbacks that sat a year and it helped them. And there are a lot of quarterbacks, I think this is happening to Justin Fields, that went in before they were ready and it hurt them. Peter Larson says, when should we expect to hear of a Jefferson extension? That is usually beginning of camp-ish, late July, early August. That would be when I would expect to hear about it. I would say after the draft, they still, like we said before, they'll have Kirk Cousins negotiations to go through if they whiff on quarterback. They'll have Zadarius Smith, Danielle Hunter, maybe even Dalvin Cook stuff to deal with. So there's things on the to-do list right after the draft for the front office. And then they can get to these extensions of guys like Jefferson, Hawkinson, maybe even Ezra Cleveland is a dark horse for one. That will not come for a while yet, though. That's usually a late summer thing. Skull, and then a bunch of numbers, says, do you think that the transition to a Shanahan scheme came from KOC looking at our personnel and seeing that our O-line is better at run blocking than pass pro? We don't have three wideouts that can play at a high level, and Kirk is great at a play action. I'm sure that's part of it, but for me, it was that the run game really struggled and was inefficient, and they want to fix the run game by adding more diversity to it, and a way to add more diversity to it is by adding more variations on some of the same plays, and by moving to an outside zone strong versus outside zone weak. I talked about that at length in a previous episode. I probably will talk about it at length again over the course of the offseason, but I think it's much more about fixing the run game than it is about the skill sets of players in particular. And Get Quackin' says, where would you set the Vegas over-under line for money and year on JJ's new deal when that happens? Here is what I think. I'm going to guess over under 4 years, because I could see a 3-year deal if JJ gets what he wants, and I could see a 5-year deal if the Vikings get what they want. That's typically the way this goes. Players want to go back to the negotiating table a lot more. It gets them more money. Teams want to lock Patrick Mahomes down for 10 years and not have to worry about it again. So that's year. I would put the over under at 4, and I would probably put the over under at like 30 million. In terms of money, that seems to be 30 million average a year. That seems to be about the going market rate for wide receivers. So 4 years, 30 mil, 4 years, 120. That's something like that. 5 years, 160 would be super cool, or 150 would be super cool. But we'll see where that ends up. It's actually pretty intriguing, but conversation for months from now. Tomorrow on the show, I've got a couple of other prospects I want to talk to you about. We only have a few shows left before we get into real cram for the draft mode, which is what next week will be. So make sure you stick around with the Locked On Vikings podcast and cram with me. It's like studying for finals in here. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.